Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Maya Tarashvili. I'm the Deputy Director of Research here at the Foreign Policy Research Institute. And as you have seen from the event title, today we'll be talking about Georgia. So let's just dive into it. While all eyes are in Ukraine, as Moscow wages the deadly war there for 5 months and counting, there is another war being fought just a few miles away in the South Caucasus. This war is in Georgia, and it's one of democracy versus oligarchic rule. The fight, seemingly a losing one, I might add, is one of fading out of relevancy and into Russia's orbit. And this fight is only intensifying. Last week, I hosted an event at FPRI where we discussed Azerbaijan, its integral role in helping Europe achieve energy independence away from Russia, and its peculiar position, having to juggle its relationship with Russia and the West. At this discussion, my colleagues pointed out how Azerbaijan is one of very few, if not only, countries in the region that juggles this relationship quite effectively. We talked about the importance of Azerbaijan's stability and the EU's need to invest in its relationship with Azerbaijan during such a critical time. And here I will mention that Azerbaijan is an authoritarian state. In 2017, my colleagues and I published a book where we wrote about US democracy assistance around the world. And we concluded that it's very valuable and important for the United States to encourage and assist democracies around the world. But we also agreed that the system itself was quite flawed, that we need to have more of a triage approach, not demand democracy, Western style democracy, wholesale and everywhere, and not use the same approach everywhere. Perhaps focus on more approaches tailored to each country's unique situation, emphasizing local ownership, empowering local movements for progress. At such a peculiar time, especially in the Eurasia region right now, it is easy to argue for prioritizing stability over democratic change. And Azerbaijan has been a good recent example of this. But today, I'm here to talk to you about a country that has never been stable or reliable unless it's on a democratic path. While Azerbaijan offers a reliable partnership to and important solutions to the West and its contemporary challenges like the energy crisis, and it remains an authoritarian state, Georgia devolves into chaos, unpredictability, and ever-growing dangerous Russian influence whenever it is off its democratic path. Over the recent years, since the billionaire oligarch Bidzina Ivanishvili took over in 2012, Georgia has devolved into a country where European diplomats are threatened, treated with disdain, and American leaders are accused of wanting to drag the country into a war with Russia. The United States wants to open a second front in Georgia, to quote the billionaire oligarch Bidzina Ivanishvili and most of his colleagues, the political leaders of Georgia at the moment from the ruling party. Historically, a democratic Georgia has also been a stable Georgia, a reliable and eager partner to its Western allies, a regional hub for doing business, and for even solving territorial disputes like we've seen between Armenia and Azerbaijan. Georgia derailed from its democratic path is one that feeds into the kind of regional chaos that Russia thrives on. Its politicians, mostly made up of Ivanishvili's personal employees, feud with Western partners and bully their diplomats. It serves as Russia's laundromat and enables high-level corruption. And most importantly, torpedoes all Western investment initiatives for critical infrastructure projects like the Anaklia deep sea port in favor of Russia's strategic interests. It feuds with Ukraine and spreads disinformation about its government, while the latter is fending off Russia's deadly attacks every day. All of this recently culminated into the EU's historic decision to grant formal EU membership candidate status to Moldova and Ukraine, but not to Georgia, breaking up the trio of EU Eastern Partnership countries, which, by the way, during the previous years was dominated by Georgia as the democratic frontrunner. Now it's time for the United States to act before it's too late. for the US supporting the current status quo in Georgia and rolling with the punches does not mean guaranteeing stability in the region. For the US needs to get clear about its Georgia policy, which will then in turn feed into a more coherent Western policy towards the Black Sea region. So there's a lot to unpack here. I have many questions, and I want to delve a little bit more into some of these issues to answer the very question that I get quite frequently nowadays, especially in Washington: what happened to Georgia? So I have asked three of my dear colleagues, dear Georgian colleagues, to join me in this conversation. Ambassador Batu Kouteliya is a member of the board of the Atlantic Council of Georgia. He has previously served as the Deputy Secretary of the National Security Council of Georgia, and he was also the ambassador of Georgia to the United States, Canada, and Mexico from 2008 through 2011. His fuller bio is on this event page and on our website at fpri.org. Ambassador Dato Sikharulidzé is the former Georgian ambassador to the US and also a former Minister of Defense. He's also a member of the board of the Atlantic Council of Georgia. He is a part of the political movement TROA. He was NATO Fellow from 2001 to 2003 and Fulbright Visiting Scholar at Elliott School of International Affairs at GW in Washington. Again, his fuller bio is on our website, so I won't take too much more time going into everyone's really excellent credentials. And finally, we have Mira Kopradze here, who is a fellow at FPRI's Eurasia program. He was Georgian Ministry of Defense representative to the United Nations from 2015 through 2019. And prior to that assignment, he served as the Assistant Defense Attaché at the Embassy of Georgia to the United States in Washington. So with that very long introduction, let me just get right into the discussion. So I want to encourage our audience members to send in their questions throughout this conversation. I want to make it as conversational as we possibly can, so I will get to all of your questions, I promise. But let me turn it over to you. What were the EU's requirements for Georgia's candidacy status? And how likely is it for Georgia to fulfill these conditions in time?
Thank you, Maya. Thank you for organizing this event. It's very timely to have discussion about the fate of Georgia. As you rightly mentioned, the front runner, formerly as being a front runner of democratic reforms and modernization of the state in the region and wider in the region, and a poster child of democratic transformation, rapid democratic transformation, in a system which really, and the neighborhood which really provided a different context. So that created a image of Georgia as the one of the best performer in terms of democratic transformation. And now, as the title of this event suggests, and I like it very much, Georgia's falling from this grace. And we have to, before going to the EU part of your question, in a bigger context, it's important to have an understanding of what type of political system or what type of country Georgia is right now, and how it ended up there. So I think the best description of Georgia right now is some sort of competitive authoritarianism. So this is a form of political system when it's an authoritarian ruler or informal ruler holds the institution in his hands. But as a disguise of the political system, we have an elections that looks like from the distance as a competitive, but outcome is predetermined because every branch of the institution that is supposed to make the democratic processes function in the country is owned by one person who has appointed as the heads of those institutions his personal bodyguards, assistants, lawyers, etc. So the country is owned by Bidzina Ivanishvili. So it's a state capture, with a political system of competitive authoritarians. Now, the next question is how Georgia ended up there, being a beacon of democracy recently, and now in the last 10 years, becoming a country that is even lagging behind of the all others, especially for the European and Euro-Atlantic integration. Well, the best way to describe how we ended up there is a paraphrase of Hemingway's character describing his bankruptcy in the novel Siesta, how he got bankrupted, and he replies that slowly and then suddenly. So yes, Georgia was slowly moving in that direction. Ivanishvili, after taking power through the democratic elections, when the previous government democratically handed over and lost the elections, and then slowly we saw the Russian style of state capture, step by step, exactly like Putin's playbook, taking media, businesses, political institutions, and eliminating space for political discourse, and rather manipulating society through fears and some kind of artificially imposed shocks or artificially attempted polarization of the society. And I want to underline this word polarization because it has a connectivity to the EU part of the question that you have asked. So this polarization, now everybody speaks that yes, Georgian society is polarized. Frankly, I think Georgian society is not polarized on the key issues. 80% of Georgians support EU and NATO membership, and all the public opinion polls, public rallies, street protests confirm that the majority of Georgians want this pass. The problem is that the government is trying to create an artificial or fake or illusorily dividing line as if country is divided by two, and with the fear mongering of West pushing us to engage in the war, or the previous governmental officials or Saakashvili will come back and will punish you. All these irrational fears has been used as a tool of manipulating emotions with the rational fears. So we have oligarch authoritarian informal rule through all the democratic institutions that he captured, whether it's judiciary, election, economic institutions, and on top of it, we have attempted polarization through the media that is owned, financed by the government, and there have been effects quite well researched by the Facebook and Atlantic Council's the FR Lab when government supported troll factories were seeding anti-Western propaganda and polarization within this society, while on the other hand, accepting quite a generous donor support from the Western countries for strategic communications. So it was a rather bleak facade, but in reality, slowly we were approaching to that point. And now everything has been revealed. Why this has been revealed so vividly? Because of the Ukraine and because of Ukraine's brave fight against Russia, because the system that Ivanishvili constructed here not only resembles, but like a connected vessel is connected to the Russian kleptocratic system. It drives its moral and financial strength through the Russian kleptocracy, money laundering, and we've seen now that the Georgian government been siding with the Russian government. So all this in mind as in a context, and then having geopolitical processes accelerated because of the Ukraine's brave fight, European Union decided to move forward with the associated trio of Georgia, Ukraine, and Moldova to offer them, first of all, Ukraine, and then Georgia and Moldova, because we've been the top three candidates for that process, the candidacy status. But then when it came to the in-depth discussions of on the merit basis, it was quite obvious that the Georgia, in terms of its merits, is not on the right trajectory. With an instant picture, Georgia might look a better institutionally governed country, maybe than Moldova or maybe at some stage in Ukraine. But the in dynamics, trajectory is different. Ukraine and Moldova have a positive trajectory and moving in a positive direction, putting some reforms in place, while Georgia has a backtrack trajectory. And that's this alarming thing. And the backtracking now became really very obvious and vivid. So that's why now Georgia is held back. And Georgia was offered to produce some significant deliverables. It's a 12-point plan suggested by the EU by the end of year, or maybe before again opening a discussion of bringing Georgia in the group of the candidate countries. But I personally think the system in place, I do not see any meaningful way of achieving progress in terms of Georgia's approximation to European Union without peaceful change of the power. Peaceful change of power of Ivanishvili and its proxies, and slowly taking the captured state and the institutions from their hands. This is not an easy task with the degree of the state capture right now we see in Georgia, but this is the only possible way for Georgia to get the candidate status and accelerate this process. From today till the moment when we will have a new government with a higher legitimacy through the democratic elections and not the sham elections that has been held last 3 times in Georgia, well, it's a very vulnerable period. How to do it peacefully, considering, first of all, the nature of the authoritarian rulers to cling to the power and not to release it, and also degree of the Russian infiltration in Georgia, especially being increased recently when we saw huge inflow of Russian money and Russian immigrants to Georgia. With all this in mind and the scandals, a cascade of scandals you described, Georgia is now moving in a totally different direction than Western integration. Hope for us to bring back our country is the public opinion and public willingness to influence the trajectory of the country. But the downside is the very strong and heavy state capture, which cannot be achieved without external support. And under the external support, I mean some tools of the external coercion of those who maintain the power, including, first of all, starting from Ivanishvili, and branches of his kleptocratic system or informal governance system. So that's where we stand right now. But all the 12 conditions that EU put forward for Georgia is easily implementable and doable. Everyone in Georgia, whether it's a civil society, political opposition, and media, everyone knows what needs to be done. And with the government in place who has a higher legitimacy through democratic elections, they can immediately start implementing this process and make it irreversible. But until this change happens, I personally do not see any prospects of Georgia moving closer to those goals that EU set for us. Because simply this means that GD should lose the power, and Ivanishvili is not in a position or in a mood to lose his power right now. I will stop here and I will...
Thank you, Batu. Yes, thank you. Speaking of external support, let me turn this over to Dato. Many might argue that Georgia is just a small country in the Caucasus, and if its government chooses to alienate Western allies and go east, if you will, it's not a big deal. Georgia does not have a lot to offer to the West in terms of its strategic importance or resources. Dato, how would you respond to that argument? Why does Georgia matter?
Well, thanks for the question. Let me start by saying that, and then echo you and Batu, that we are all now very carefully watching and supporting wholeheartedly Ukraine's fight for its independence and freedom. And I agree with that. This fight is not only for Ukraine. This fight is for the democracy and stability and peace and prosperity in Europe. So our hearts and minds with Ukrainians today. Let's say about a couple of the Georgia always has been more than Georgia. And Georgia always was providing the good example for the region, which is not very well known for its strong democratic traditions, that a country with democratic governance, modernization in the government can be successful country, and can and then by this Georgia was providing the good example for the region. It was encouragement for reformers all across the region and discouragement for authoritarian tendencies in the region, and therefore it was serving bigger purpose than only democratization and modernization its own government. Secondly, and then it's becoming even more important now when we are looking when this terrible war is fought in Ukraine, and major European powers understand better and better that how big mistake was it to have this heavy dependency on Russian oil and gas, and not only on Russian oil and gas, but also the energy infrastructure that was taking not only Russian energy resources to European market, but also the Central Asian resources. So now, for example, this Transcaucasian component and gas from the Eastern Caspian of Azerbaijan is getting to European market. This is practically the only way to get this gas to the European market, bypassing Russia through the gas pipeline that goes from Azerbaijan through Georgia to Turkey. Also, there is a huge potential if there is a proper political will and efforts to prolong this way and energy infrastructure from Central Asia to across Caspian Sea to Azerbaijan, Georgia, and toward European market. So it would be one of those additional solutions to European energy issues. And then it's not only limited with hydrocarbons, but also it should be providing additional routes for transportation, cargo, trade, and information exchange from Europe to Central Asia, bypassing Russian routes that are always used for political purposes by Kremlin. So those issues are important. But as Batu was speaking about the importance of Georgia, so Georgia also, as I said at the beginning, Georgia was always providing the best example of a country being very keen to transform itself, promote its democratic governance, modern governance, and by this provide good example to other countries of the region. So nowadays, unfortunately, we are seeing a reverse picture, and not only this, but we also see that Russian-style state capture in Georgia. We see Georgian government undermining those important strategic projects. You mentioned Anaklia port, which was one of the main projects that would be very important, not only for Georgia. First of all, for Georgia, that would be one of those components that would promote Georgia's economic development. That was torpedoed by current government, and as rumor has it, that was this served the interests of Kremlin, because they don't want to see any other deep sea port on the Black Sea, which would support this link from Europe to Central Asia, bypassing Russia. the transportation link. Secondly, once very prosperous and very well-working enterprise, the Georgian Railway has become the enterprise that is losing money instead of earning money, and then this has yet another proof that the Georgian government is actually undermining Georgia's strategic objectives and strategic projects. So I hope this answers your question. I have some other issues to.
Sure. Thank you, Dato, and we can delve into. Thank you, Dato, and we can delve into that a little bit more in the Q&A. And I want to encourage our audience members to send in their questions throughout this conversation. Mira, I want to turn it over to you. You recently argued that one of the solutions to Georgia's troubles will be for the West to sanction Bidzina Ivanishvili, billionaire oligarch behind the current government. Why would you argue this, and sort of how would you support this argument?
Yeah, well, Maya, thank you very much, and thank you very much for organizing this event. I think I need to step back and see the context first of all before I answer this very important question. This is very unfortunate that we are talking about Georgia's de-oligarchization. I think we should have been talking about Georgia's democratic consolidation, and this is very sad for Georgia and pro-Western people in Georgia and for the region, because Georgia once was darling of the West and the poster child for democracy, and it was basically the model for countries in transition. But unfortunately, in the past 10 years, Georgia has been transformed and has become oligarchic, gray, autocratic regime, which actually falls in line with the Russia's strategy to create some kind of a circle of autocratic states around its territory. So this is very unfortunate. But the main challenge to Georgia's democratic transformation and consolidation was Bidzina Ivanishvili. Bidzina Ivanishvili is an oligarch who has made this money in Russia, $7 billion, and he's been challenged now. We saw that the global hunt for oligarchs globally forced Bidzina Ivanishvili to show where his real loyalties lie, and he's taken the Russian side. Bidzina Ivanishvili, with other oligarchs, is trying to pay debt to Russia and the Kremlin, and that's why. So he's taking sides. He's taking sides with Russia. It's very unfortunate to see the propaganda campaign going on in Georgia, blaming West, blaming European Union, blaming America, and saying that those countries are trying to drag Georgia into the war with Russia. So I think we need to pay attention what's going on the ground, but we also need to see what's behind. We need to see in this geopolitical dynamic that Georgia's strategic value is rising. We see that Europeans are more interested getting gas and oil from Azerbaijan. We are seeing that there is a growing cleavage between Russia and Kazakhstan, and Kazakhstan is very interested sending its gas and oil resources through Georgia or circumventing Russia. And we see the trade between China and West now maybe the routes which were going through Russia may be circumventing Russia, and maybe some of the routes find their way through Georgia to Europe. So Georgia's strategic value is increasing and becoming bigger and bigger. But now for the West, it is very important to see reliable partner in Georgia, reliable partner, democratic country. Because when we see, what we see now is that West and Russia are in this conflict in the long haul. So the West will need reliable partner in Georgia. With this regime, autocratic regime, with the close ties with Russia, this may pose serious challenge to Western sanctions against Russia. So having oligarchic regime in Georgia, Bidzina Ivanishvili, with these informal power brokers, informal rulers, kleptocratic system may undermine this sanction package, which has been imposed on Russia. So for example, we can see that Georgia may offer outsourcing opportunities for Russian companies in Georgia. Maybe some IT workers, that there are lots of IT workers move to Georgia and no one knows what they are doing. Also, we have seen some incidents of Russian ships found with illegal and banned products found in Georgian ports. So these are the questions we need to answer, because as sanctions start biting, and more in the coming days, months, and maybe years, Russia will engage more. Russia will try to use Georgian ports, Georgian land routes to import illegal and banned products into Russian territory. So I think that's a serious challenge. And through Georgian ports, through this informal communications, Russia can actually restart its military machine with the revenues coming from banned products such as oil, gas, coal, caviar, maybe, and pose a serious challenge to overall sanction. There's a sanction package which is imposed on Russia. And I think this is very important to consider for the West. Do we need to have this kind of regime in Georgia, which is ruled by oligarch and which is influenced by Russia, and when no one really knows who really does what in Georgia? In the past several months, we saw the influx of Russian people. Over 100,000 Russians have moved to Georgia. They established thousands of companies, opened thousands of bank accounts, and Georgia could be used, as I said, as a staging ground to kind of outsource and support Russian system. And this will be, I think, one of the biggest challenges. So I think the West needs to really reconsider its policies to Georgia, and I think it needs to take some concrete steps. And from recent history, we know that United States and European Union, they have wide range of tools available in their toolkit to impose sanctions. For example, Bidzina Ivanishvili, his inner circle, and basically a henchman, if you will. So maybe some visa restrictions, some financial structures, financial sanctions. So this will degrade Bidzina Ivanishvili's financial power. This will undermine his legitimacy, and help pro-Western forces to start making some changes on the ground. I think the West also needs to support civil society more. They need to be very clear on messages, because Georgia, what Ivanishvili's government has done very well is the propaganda campaign. They have confused people. They saw the discord, dissension in Georgian society. After the war, 2008, Georgian society is traumatized and it divided. No one wants to go to war with Russia, so they are scared. But Bidzina Ivanishvili is using this fear very well, and it's kind of dividing society. So I think the West needs to be more clear on its messages, need to support pro-Western forces on the ground, whether this is civil society, media, or pro-Western political forces, because Georgia, it's not only Georgia at stake, but it's the region at stake. And Georgia always was bigger than Georgia itself. Georgia was considered a stepping stone for democracy in the region, and I think the approach should be the same, to help Georgia, by helping Georgia, by sanctioning Ivanishvili, by sanctioning his henchmen. International community, the West, will strengthen another point on the Russian border, and the sanctions will be more effective in that sense.
Thank you, Mira. I appreciate your remarks. I'll start introducing some of the audience questions as well, and sort of blend them with my own. Bob Hamilton asks, Georgia's descent into competitive authoritarian rule and oligarchic state capture is obvious to anyone who has been paying attention. Why do you think the U.S. has been so slow to acknowledge what is happening in Georgia, and what steps should the U.S. take now? To me, this comes back to my initial opening remarks. It's a combination of a few factors. There is, in my opinion, a very false approach to understanding regional stability, right? Don't upset the status quo, don't make too much noise. And let's focus on stability versus democratic consolidation. And as I've argued, I think that's a really misguided approach for a country like Georgia. It may work elsewhere, like I said, like Azerbaijan. I also think that there is a great deal of complacency when it comes to our U.S. sort of foreign policy institutions, if you will. A lot of people just, prefer to be comfortable and keep carrying out the longstanding policies without stirring up too much trouble. And again, that is not working. And I think it will be too late, right? By the time we realize it's not working and we need to adjust our approach towards Georgia. How many more times does the government need to accuse the United States of trying to start a war in Georgia? Right before the U.S. has had enough? How many more false narratives do the government officials need to spread about U.S. interests and agenda in Georgia before we start, deploying some conditionality? But I would love to hear your take on this. So let's start with you. Why has the U.S. been so slow to acknowledge the regression in Georgia, and what steps should it take now? And let's keep it kind of brief. Maybe Dato, Batu, and then Miro.
Well, yes, actually, this oligarchic state capture is, I agree with Bob, that it's obvious. And I think that, well, I cannot judge other countries' policies. It's especially now when all focus is on Ukraine, but it is definitely was brewing for some time already. So it's nothing new that happening now. We do remember that a few years ago, Facebook and Atlantic Council's DFR lab shut down 400 accounts, fake accounts that were associated with Georgian Dream. This is the oligarch's party, Ivanishvili's party, that were associated with this political party, and they were promoting and spreading anti-Western, anti-liberal propaganda around. So we've seen many other steps, including undermining of Georgia's Georgia's strategic interests. We've seen the politically motivated PR campaigns, the Russian-style shocking campaigns that were directed to undermine Georgia's relations with its strategic partners, not only with the West, but also with strategic partners like Ukraine. There is famous cartographer's case. I won't go deeply in these details, but also they're one of the figures that was playing part in this so-called drama was the person with strong links with infamous Sistema, which is the Russian KGB associated company. So since war started in Ukraine, and then processes have been accelerated, the issues related to Georgia's European candidate status have been accelerated. This anti-Western propaganda has become even more visible, and then all those steps that have been taken, blaming that the West is trying to drag Georgia into the war, and this attacks on the not only personally on U.S. ambassador to Georgia or EU ambassador to Georgia, but every single member of European Parliament, every single Georgian foreign friend who ever supported Georgia's Euro-Atlantic aspirations, whoever supported Georgia's strong stance against Russia and Russian occupation of Georgian territories, have been personally attacked. European parliamentarians, former officials, current officials, and so on and so on. So I think that this is where it is not what I'm trying to prove that those issues are not isolated incidents that are happening or they're only politically motivated, but I think it's a kind of well-structured strategy to derail Georgia from the path, its European path. And last but not least, and I agree completely with Batu when he's speaking about the polarization of Georgian society. Now it's very in fashion. Even those who are just very critical of oligarch Ivanishvili, they are even sometimes repeat this, that it's a terrible polarization within Georgian society. But I don't think so, because this polarization is not about issues, not about Georgia's Euro-Atlantic future. 80%, overwhelming majority of Georgians do support the Georgia's European future, Georgia's democratic future, and I think that this is something that unites Georgians rather than divides. That only a small bunch of Ivanishvili's associates, and then those who are directly benefiting from this oligarchic rule, they are trying to position themselves against these values that are so widely supported by Georgian population. And I think this creates very solid ground for Georgian democratic forces to unite and to move ahead and carry forward the issues that are eventually bring Georgia to its democratic future and its Euro-Atlantic future.
Dato, thank you so much. I'm actually going to be mindful of the time and the excellent questions we're getting. So I'm going to move into the next question, which very much sort of coincides with my own concern as well. Guga Chomahidze about the state of the opposition. It's people demand snap elections and peacefully change the government. What does the civil society, media, and the opposition need to do to ensure a peaceful transition of power? I'll add my 2 cents here as well. The fact that we have to also acknowledge, right, that there's a great deal of societal fatigue, political fatigue, and a great deal of distrust, not just in the political institutions, not just in the ruling party, but overall in the viability of the opposition forces. And I understand a lot of it is a product of this very effective disinformation propaganda. But the truth is, it's very hard to look at the Georgian opposition politics, right, and point out some viable leaders, viable candidates. There's a lot of excellent activism going on, but the activism has not really translated into, again, the kind of viable opposition that could lead to peaceful transfer of power into something other than this oligarchic rule. So, Batu, I want to turn it over to you. You have some experience in being a part of the so-called radical opposition, which is all opposition in Georgia, according to its government. So, what's your comment on this, on the state of the opposition?
Well, that's a very important question that we are struggling with as well. Right now, we see that because of this artificially imposed polarization, plus with the heavy-handed ruling with the security services coercing everyone who is opposition-minded, launching the politically motivated cases against every opposition political leader, every opposition media owner, every prominent opposition-minded businessman. All of them are under the investigation, and there are some artificially fabricated cases. We have one of the media managers of opposition channel, Nick Gwaramia, in jail. We have third president of Georgia, totally with a fabricated case. The same concerns the third president of Georgia, Saakashvili, who is in jail, and plus set of the legal cases against. So in combination of this judiciary that is totally under the political control, elections are run in Georgia as a, let's say, more like an organized crime syndicate. Everyone is connected through money, through some personal benefits and the personal loyalty, and security services are running the elections. They know exactly the public mood. They are coercing ones who are opposition-minded. They are manipulating with numbers. So you have a whole set of rigging the elections. On top of it, we see and that's also the problem from the Western side, because there was an inertia that Georgia is maybe imperfect, but democracy. So it is hard to shift gears and call this spade, and calling Georgia not democracy anymore. So we've seen that there was a huge amount of US taxpayers' money spent on judiciary reform, while there already was a warning from the civil society that this money has been misused and we are having just the opposite results. Now we ended up that, yes, this money has been sent, that we see with this money and plus other means, the judiciary is fully owned for political purposes by Ivanishvili and his proxies. So in that context, of course, it's really hard to mobilize the public, and plus propaganda. One of the tasks of the propaganda is to show that the ones who hold the power, who are in minority, I believe, they are to create an image that they are in majority. So to see that apathy in the opposition-minded people who do not like, who have a lot of things to protest, starting from economy to the daily life, political stuff, and on top of it, with this type of artificially created shocks and scandals, there is no space for the normal political debate. Entire agenda is just hijacked, and government is doing it really very easily because, again, as I said, they maintain control on the propaganda outlet. So there is no space for the normal political debate. So activism is the only thing, and even the activism was fading away because of heavy-handed means that government employs, changing the rules that fining everyone who protests, even within the frames of the democratic way of protesting, heavy fines, putting them in jail for a couple of days, then increasing the imprisonment time, increasing the fines. So activism was fading away. But then became the Russia war against Ukraine, which really galvanized the understanding of the public when Georgian government said that we are not with Ukraine. And that was a triggering factor for everyone. So Georgia's support to Ukraine and Georgia's European path that has been derailed was the two issues of political agenda that brought hundreds of thousands of Georgians in the street. So that was the first moment then opposition minded people. And frankly, right now, we do not have a luxury to debate economic or social or security policies, unfortunately. But we have to galvanize everyone against the government who takes the country in a direction which 80% of this country's population do not want. So this is the state currently. And one of the reasons why, also answering Bob's question, why US is also, or the Western partners were slow to react on this, was this inertia, democratic inertia, and boiling the frog tactics by Ivanishvili and Russian state capture through Ivanishvili. We have now this Yanukovych momentum, but better prepared than Yanukovych did when he did this. So that's why it's important now to have a more straightforward assessment of the existing situation and then deploying the means to revert the situation in a proper direction.
Thank you, Batu. I agree with you. I would argue that it's not too late to adjust course and stop being so afraid to deploy the immense leverage that the US has over Georgia. I want to turn the next question over to you, Miro. Sarah Sly asks, Professor Tsikharlidze said that Georgia's strategic importance for the West is due to, in part, to the strategic importance of the Caucasus region, especially the South Caucasus. But it seems the strategic importance of the Caucasus region has been historically undervalued. Would you agree with this statement? And if so, how can this unfortunate situation be remedied? Miro, I want to turn this over to you because you have spent the better part of the recent decade in Washington. So do you feel like the importance of the Caucasus region has been undervalued in DC?
Well, yeah, thank you very much. It's a very, very important question. I think in recent years, you can see that Georgia's strategic importance has been undervalued, not only in Washington, but overall, given specific circumstances. I think the winds of the geopolitics have played in this very much so. Given United States strategic reorientation to Indo-Pacific and to Asia, given United States and the European, the cleavage between this European Union and the United States, and given these pandemics and all these big issues, actually really played significant role on this. But now the conflict between Russia and the West and invasion of Russia of Ukraine now actually really made everything more clear. And I think now in the West, in the United States, people are seeing the value of Georgia and the South Caucasus. As I mentioned, while the Chinese, for example, are aligning with Russia and their rhetoric, their companies are very, very careful with breaching the sanctions, Western sanctions. So now when they send their products and goods through Russia to Europe, now they are reconsidering that, and they will be sending some of those goods and products through Georgia, Central Asia to Europe. So I think this really increases strategic value of the South Caucasus. And also, as I also mentioned, the Central Asian states, and particularly Kazakhstan, is now obvious that there is a growing cleavage with Russia, and Kazakhstan is also very much interested in sending its products through. So this is the only way is now Georgia and the South Caucasus. And given the European interest in Azerbaijani's oil and gas, now also adds to this point that the strategic importance of the South Caucasus is growing. But also, the democracy is very important. Democracy is very important because you can fight authoritarianism through democracy. And I think supporting democracy to grow in Georgia and strengthening Georgia and in the South Caucasus will help West to weaken and isolate Russia. And also the point of the geographic location of South Caucasus also will be very significant in this sanctions against Russia. So I think strategic value of South Caucasus is already clear and it's increasing.
Thank you, Miro. Batu, go ahead. You have your hand raised.
Just briefly on the strategic importance, I would stress more on the strategic importance of the Black Sea rather than the South Caucasus. And Black Sea, because of this war in Ukraine, is really getting a huge strategic importance, and Georgia is an important part of the wider Black Sea region. So we can speak about strategic importance of the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea region and connecting those strategic fulcrums to each other. And recently we've seen a brilliant initiative at the US Senate side. Senator Shaheen and Senator Romney initiated a bipartisan bill, draft bill on the Black Sea strategy. It describes what should be US strategic interest in the Black Sea. And with this policy in place, hopefully it will become a legislation, we really could see a changing shift of geopolitical processes in our region, in Black Sea and Caspian region, and advancing US strategic interests in a wider Eurasian continent.
Thank you, Batu. Parker Frawley asks a question, part of which I think we answered the discussion, but it does bring in Armenia and Azerbaijan, and I would really like to hear your take on that. How does Georgia's democratic backsliding affect the broader regional dynamics, especially with respect to burgeoning democratic reforms in Armenia and Azerbaijan's relations with the West, even if primarily hydrocarbon-driven? All, of course, in the shadow of the Armenia-Azerbaijani conflict. So I think we did address the first half of this question, but I want to come back to the shadow of the Armenia-Azerbaijan conflict. One, sort of comparative approach to Armenia, Azerbaijan, Georgia, right? It tells you just how diverse and dynamic the region is, because these three countries are actually very different from one another, and they all merit, I would say, very unique and tailored approach from the West. But any comments you have on this question? But in addition to this, Georgia has often been the territory for Armenia and Azerbaijan to meet and try to solve their conflict, their territorial dispute. I know there was a recent meeting there in Georgia, again, between the foreign ministers of Armenia and Azerbaijan. Are you witnessing Georgia's capacity to be the mediator? Are you witnessing it diminish over the years? Or do you think there is still a lot of promise for Georgia to serve as that regional mediator? Datu, let's start with.
Yes, I'll try to be very, very brief, actually. You are right, Maya. We have very diverse region. I agree with Batu that we have to put more focus on the Black Sea, as a region, because it's an important southeastern part of European security, and then it is important. It will play important role for European security. But when we speak, what would be the impact of Georgia's backsliding on the region? That's I have to say one thing that is, in my opinion, the most important thing is that we have very diverse South Caucasus, where Georgia is trying to become part of the West, and was trying to become part of the Western institutions and build a democratic country. On the other hand, we have Armenia, who was part of this Russian-driven security organization. And then we have Azerbaijan, who is kind of neutral. He's not trying to become part of the West, but he's neither part of the Russian dominated security institution. But what was important about Georgia, that Georgia was very quickly approaching European and Euro-Atlantic institutions. And I heard many times from my close colleagues, diplomats, academicians from both Azerbaijan and Armenia, that they, even though their declared strategic goals are different from Georgia's strategic goals, they were looking at Georgia's European and Euro-Atlantic perspective with huge hope. That no one actually doubts in Azerbaijan or in Armenia that Georgia's European EU membership or NATO membership, most importantly, would bring more security, prosperity, and stability in the region. Now, with Georgia's oligarchic takeover, these perspectives are just becoming more vague. So therefore, I mean that would be the I can imagine what reaction they have on this particular issue. And also, let me end by quickly mentioning that all those reforms that Georgia implemented with regard of the effective government and the democratization and effective governance, that we are highly regarded by both Azerbaijan and Armenian intellectuals. And therefore, I mean, Georgia's European and Euro-Atlantic perspective is also would play huge role for these countries and for region in general.
But there's a really important question that I want to ask is our last question. Randall Newham asks, Russian refugees came to Georgia help the opposition. One, calling them Russian refugees, we can just put a question mark there, right? But because that's already such a huge debate. But then the Russians who have come to Georgia, oftentimes not necessarily fleeing, but perhaps looking to park their money or enjoy the freedoms they can get, so on and so forth. I hate calling them refugees while we have very real Ukrainian refugees in need of our help and attention. Maybe each of you could just comment on this situation, right? How I hear Georgia is full of Russian tourists or long-term tourists or refugees.
It's very dangerous. It's very dangerous, and then especially we were advocating, and then we came up with a few times with the initiative that the Georgia should introduce visa regime over Russia. First of all, these people are not refugees. No one is bombing Russia. We have a few thousand Ukrainian refugees. They are very welcomed, and then we were embracing them. But in my opinion, we have to be much more careful when accepting that this big flood. So of people from Russian citizens, because we, according to last data, only in June, 135,000 Russian citizens entered Georgia, and then most of them are staying here for a while, and then this is increasing. Well, at least Georgian government should introduce collection of biometric data, which is well-known internationally countries are doing this, and then this biometric data is important component, and then proper procedures for accepting or entrance of these people to Georgia, because it carries many risks, starting from the risks of infiltration of Russian special services, and we know that the scale the Russian special services are working in other countries, coming down to risks of using Georgian institutions by these people to one way or another for their economic activities that would be otherwise forbidden in Russia or try attempt. So I think that at least the least the Georgian government should do, then it is in interest of Georgia, national interest of Georgia, that we should be introducing a minimum proper procedures and collection of biometric data of this, and then proper procedures of for the granting them a temporary visitors status to Georgia.
Thank you, Dato. Batu, I would love to hear your opinion, but also let me ask you, do you think that Georgia should impose a visa system to Russia, just like Russia has it for Georgia?
Yes. First of all, we should have done this earlier because of the reciprocity. Second, because of the threats that Russia poses to Georgia, different nature of the threats. Even there are Russian tourists and there are Russian tourists, and there are Russian green tourists as they appeared in Crimea, one of southern. So there is a danger of the Russian infiltration, and stakes are high. Georgia's geographic location, some of strategic infrastructure that is especially energy ones on Georgian territory really may create a temptation for Russia to do some things that they are quite good at doing, and we've seen them orchestrating this type of things. When I am elaborating on the possible threat scenarios, I also tend to use the Montenegro case, when just before joining NATO in 2016, Russia almost successfully staged the coup d'etat or doing some kind of, shootouts in the streets. Luckily, that has been prevented, but nothing would prevent them attempting it in Georgia, especially when they have a government who is heavily infiltrated or in most of the cases cooperating. Another thing about the refugees, I agree with Dato. There are no Russian refugees. There is war on Russian territory. And there might be some people who are not happy what Putin is doing, or they do not want to be called in the army, and they are trying to leave Russian Federation. But on the other hand, we see that there are Russians who bringing the money, who are creating some loopholes for Russia to avoid the sanctions, and plus there is a quite a tendency of their increased presence in Georgia's domestic economic activity, purchasing not only the real estate but trying to buy big chunks of the land and trying to create a different special segments in the business, whether it's in the real estate, IT business, or in banking and financial system. So all these components considered together, I don't see that we should be accepting Russian citizens just as freely as they do. We need to collect data. We need to work with our partners to find out identities of those who are traveling in Georgia. And plus, again, when it comes to the refugees, unfortunately, but we have a government who refuses to enter country real Putin's opponents, some of the journalists or the bloggers, while widely opening, welcoming doors for some FSB affiliated guys, like the one that Dato mentioned, guy who worked with Sistema, David Khidashvili, who bought now 50 hectares on the Georgian-Russian border, connecting one of these districts of Georgia to Russia. So again, as I said, there are no refugees, but those who are trying to escape, they've been intimidated or handed over back to Russia by the Georgian government. So there is an increased risk of Russia really manipulating with Georgia and even stirring up some staging some scenarios in Georgia that they've done. Then that's why I mentioned the Montenegro case as well.
Right, the provocation potential is
provocations
there,
of different scope and the scope.
Right. Thank you, Batu. Thank you, Dato. Thank you, Mira. Unfortunately, this is all the time we have for this discussion today, but it continues. And I want to encourage our audience members to keep an eye on our website at fpri.org, sign up for our emails, and follow us on social media on Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn. At FPRI, it's always implied that opinions expressed in our publications and even at our events are not those of the organization. They are of the individuals, even those who work there, like myself. So as a nonpartisan organization, I want to remind everyone that these opinions were very much my own, and I thank FPRI for giving us this platform. Batu Kutelia, Dato Sikharoulidze, Mira Popkhadze, you so much for joining me today in this conversation, and I very much look forward to continuing this discussion. Have a great day.
Thank you, Maya. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, FPRI. Thank you very much for having us.